Welcome. Great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
So, Laura, Forrester has done a lot of research on how companies currently approach security. So can you walk us through some of the key findings?
Sure. And we've got a handy-dandy slide up on the screen for you about this one piece of research that we did, which included just over 400 cybersecurity and technology decision makers in many different places. So you can see they're pretty much equally distributed through the 7 countries on the screen. So here in the Nordics, the UK, and France and Germany, and also in the United States and Japan. And the folks were all from companies and public sector entities of varying sizes, most between 500 and 5,000 employees. So that's a quite broad range, but generally speaking, fairly large in size. So we asked them a lot of sort of different kinds of questions about how they're doing with cybersecurity at the moment, what they're interested in, what their challenges are. And so I'll give you a sort of a slide that's probably not going to surprise too many of you. So if you ask them a bunch of questions about what they're doing with cybersecurity, you'll get the overall threats that we face each year are increasing. I'd like to know who the 20% of people who didn't agree with that statement are. I wonder if they've been paying attention, but be all that as it may. The one that might be a little surprising, if you haven't thought about this in a little while, is the second one there, which is that 3/4 of people said that cyber risk is a top priority for my organization, and our board of directors want it managed as such. So if you were to go back in time and ask that question, say 5 years ago, I would bet a fairly large sum of money that that percentage would be lower, because the level of salience in the eyes of the boards of directors and the executives of our companies has really risen over the last several years, which is a double-edged sword. It's good in many ways. It means it's much easier to get their attention when we need them to pay attention or we need to ask for things. But on the other side, it means that they're much more likely to notice when things go wrong. And I'd also like to note the percentage at the bottom of the screen there, where only 71% said that we are spending more on cybersecurity each year. I would like to know who the other 29% are and what they've been up to, because I think all of us could use a few of their secrets. No?
That's true. That's true. In a strategic sense, what kind of problems are caused by the way most companies are currently approaching security?
So there are a large number of valid answers to that, but I'm going to focus on sort of one of them that I find sort of not terribly surprising, but fairly interesting. So half of the companies that we talked to said, we find it pretty difficult to align cybersecurity priorities and business outcomes. And so we asked them, okay, what challenges do you have when doing that? So again, I want to call your attention to the most surprising number on this slide, which is the 3% at the very bottom. So these are the people who answered, none of these. We don't face any challenges with aligning cybersecurity priorities with business outcomes. Now, you can all do the math on sort of 400-odd respondents and 3%. It's not a very large number of people, but nonetheless, I really wonder about this 3%. Like, are they genuinely blessed? Or are they more than slightly delusional? I will leave that as an exercise for all of you. I know which one I think it is, but I'll be polite for the moment. The rest of the stuff on this slide is not particularly surprising. So the top 4 answers are effectively a statistical tie. You've got managing the complexity of our IT environment. You've got handling conflicting cybersecurity and business goals, because very often the things we want to do in cybersecurity can seem to be in conflict with broader business goals, such as getting into new markets, serving new kinds of customers, putting new products out there into the market. It's very easy for those 2 things to feel as though they're butting heads. You've also got a sort of more cybersecurity type answer in maintaining the efficacy of detection technology and complying with data protection and privacy requirements. So interestingly, we broke this data set down by industry as well. And in the sort of media industry, as well as in manufacturing, those folks showed the most challenge with managing the complexity of their IT environments. They really found that a struggle, sort of almost half in one case and more than half in the other, to align cybersecurity priorities with business outcomes. So this is still a difficult thing to do, which probably doesn't surprise very many of you, but in case you were feeling alone, I think my lovely slide here demonstrates that you're not.
Well, can you briefly explain what outcome-based security is, and maybe even what's the biggest difference from what most companies are doing now?
Sure. So, as you might imagine, I brought along a handy-dandy definition. So, here we are. Outcome-based security simplifies cybersecurity by investing only in capabilities that measurably deliver desired business outcomes, as opposed to the methods you might be more familiar with. So threat-based methods, what threats do we face out there in the world and how do we respond to them? Activity-based methods, as in what are all the things that we do and how successful or unsuccessful are they? Or return on investment-based methods. So those are all pretty common, and I suspect many of you either use or have used those. So this outcome-based security thing, once I articulate it that way, sounds pretty simple, right? It sounds attractive. Like most pretty good ideas, it sounds really obvious when someone articulates it, And so you might be asking yourself, okay, that sounds like common sense. Why aren't we all doing that already? And the answer to that question is actually a little more complicated, which is because it's a lot easier to say, like I just did, than it is to actually do. Because if you think about security in terms of outcomes, you have to, first of all, be really well aligned on what the business outcomes that your company is pursuing is. And you have to also be willing to let go of things. Because all of us who've been in this field for a while, I will not tell you how long I have been in this field because that makes me feel very old, but all of us who've been in this field for a while know that you build up corpuses of expertise, sets of tools, sets of procedures, sets of controls that you are comfortable with and that you want implemented because they deliver value. And when you start to look at things in an outcome-based way, that may require you to let go of some of those things. And that can be very difficult, both for us, for our teams, and sort of for our partners that we work with. So that's one reason why I think more people haven't gravitated towards this relatively common sense approach in the past. The second reason is a really interesting one, which is as your business's desired outcomes change, as they do, right? Because if you think about your company 5 years ago, what your CEO would have listed as, here are our top 3 priorities, might well be quite different from what that list says today, particularly if they're kind of at the same level of altitude. And so as your business objectives change, then if you're sort of truly linking what we do in information security to those outcomes, then what you do in information security also changes. And so you end up having interactions like, okay, so you know how 4 years ago, I asked you for 700,000 euros to invest in a bunch of different security technologies to do A, B, and C? Well, we've changed what we're targeting as a company. So those, and also we have kind of alternative routes to getting the same functionality that we need in a bunch of those cases. So I want to decommission that set of investments, which is good, but if you're not careful, it can look like, okay, so the next time you ask me for 700,000 euros, I'm going to be more skeptical because maybe 4 years later, you won't need it anymore. So I think there are probably more reasons, but those seem like the 2 biggest buckets of reasons to me why we haven't necessarily pursued this approach too much in the past.
All right, well, what are some of the biggest business payoffs for making cybersecurity a more transparent and specific outcome-focused department?
Sure, so there are a bunch of those. And I've got my lovely pizza wheel here, which I'll start up at 12 o'clock with and talk about each of these from. So the first thing that you can consider that you'll get out of doing security in an outcome-based way is increased resilience. So we've already heard a lot this morning about the resilience necessary in what is a much more difficult situation that a lot of us will ever face in Ukraine, hopefully. So the sort of thinking about resilience in a sort of a more sort of pedestrian, shall we say, private sector and public sector non-war scenario, I think resilience still has tremendous benefits in the sense of, as all of you know, the threat landscape and attackers are always changing. How they do things has changed radically over the last however many years. And so the more that we can do to stay focused on a couple of key outcomes and thus not committing ourselves to a bunch of different sort of more rigid ideas about what things we're supposed to produce and invest in, and instead kind of free ourselves up to pursue those outcomes by whatever legal means necessary, I think the better off we are. And the second benefit is a corollary to that one, which is improved productivity. So all of you who are hiring managers, raise your hand if you've had trouble finding all the talent that you need in the last little while. All right, that is fewer hands than I would have expected, so well done all of you. But I think for all of you who did raise your hand, you know that you never have enough people, you never have enough expertise, either for I can't find the people reasons or I don't have enough budget reasons, or sometimes both. And so anything that we can do to improve the productivity of the people that we do have and the sort of sets of tools that we do have, the better off we are. So as we commit to a set of outcomes and decommission a bunch of controls and tools and products that we don't necessarily need anymore because they're not advancing us towards those outcomes, the more our folks can focus and thus be more productive. And you might be a little puzzled by the enhanced competitiveness one. There are two aspects to this. One is you all are sort of, with the exception of the folks in public sector, because you are the only government of the country that you belong to, or the city that you belong to, et cetera. For all of us in the private sector, we all have competitors. And so we want to make sure that we are not behind our competition in the level of privacy and security and trust that we deliver to our customers and to our partners. And so focusing on security in an outcome-based way makes it easier to do that, because you can look at everything through the filter of, what are the outcomes that we want? What are we trying to deliver for our customers? Does this help with that? If the answer is no, then we stop doing it. And so that makes it easier for us to compete. The other side of this is that we are sort of more able to align the incentives of ourselves and our partners. So if you and your chosen partner can say, this is the outcome that you're going for, I'm going to help you get there, then that sort of removes any problems in that relationship where one of you is working towards one goal and one of you is working towards a different goal. So you become more competitive together. The next one is reduced risk. So the most dangerous position that you can be in with regard to risk, in my opinion, is when you think your sort of portfolio of risks looks like this, and your various levels of risks look like this, but actually your portfolio is different, and the levels of risk are not what you think, because then you're sort of effectively operating in the dark. Outcome-based security helps you with that, because as you focus on, here are my outcomes that I want, here's the portfolio of risks that I face, here's how those relate to those outcomes, here's how I want to mitigate those risks, it's just easier to make sure you don't miss things, because you're trying to do fewer things, which in all of our world is easier. And the next thing you've got is proactive control. All of us wish to make security more proactive. I'm sure none of us would like to work another sort of 50-hour period over a holiday weekend to deal with some ransomware attack or fill in the blank favorite thing. So the more we can be proactive and sort of control our environments, figure out what outcomes we want, and sort of implement the controls that help us pursue those outcomes, the better off we'll be. And it'll help us to respond more effectively to cyber threats, because as we're trying to deal with fewer things, we can focus on the threats that are actually pertinent for us, right? Because forgive me if I'm going to use a very old story that many of you know, but you've probably heard the story about how doing cybersecurity is a bit like being chased by a bunch of hungry bears. As long as you're not last, the bear eats somebody else and not you, so you win. In sort of a different world, you can have angry bears who are more focused on you as a target. This is where the analogy falls apart, so forgive me. And so if the angry bear wants to eat you specifically, then just being faster than the person next to you isn't going to get the job done. So it's always important in all of our worlds to differentiate between where's the part where we're just being chased by a bunch of hungry bears, and so we just have to kind of do things a little better than the bare minimum, and where are the places where we're specifically a target, and sort of and we need to do things differently based on those two things. Outcome-based security helps you make that distinction better. And finally, the thing at the top of my wheel here will make you very popular with your CFO for a change, which normally we're not, because normally we're asking for more money every single year, except for the 20% or whatever it was who weren't asking for more money every year in my first slide. So outcome-based security helps you with cost control because you're actually decommissioning things. So if your company's been around a while, the chances are that you've, not on purpose, but sort of by the progress of the years, pursued a strategy that might be described as expense in depth. You bought some stuff some number of years ago because you needed to mitigate a specific risk. And then time moved on, and a bunch of the sort of product universe that you already had actually started to do a good job. mitigating that particular risk, and so you no longer need the thing that you bought 4 or 5 years ago. So you should decommission that thing. But we never do that. We just keep the stuff around forever. And so with outcome-based security, it gives you a tool to say, okay, here are the outcomes I'm pursuing, what's not relevant to these outcomes, understanding that there's a certain level of baseline security that we have to provide. So you don't want to be getting rid of the things that do sort of table stakes stuff that everyone has to do through the outcome-based security lens, but I don't imagine many of you would actually do that. So this should really help you with the next conversation with your CFO so that he or she does not start avoiding you in the hallways and is actually glad to see you. So there are a lot of benefits for doing outcome-based security, and I think this is sort of most of the major ones, but you'll probably find others as you go on.
Thank you so much.